Out there in UK crime book land. I'm here with Kate Bendelow to talk about her audiobook with ISIS. If you could talk to us about Definitely Dead, please, Kate.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So as Alex said, I am Kate Bendelow, the author of Definitely Dead, which has just been released in audiobook. Definitely Dead is the first in the Soko Maya Barton trilogy. The second book in the series, Shattered Bones, is also released. That was out in October, and I'm currently working on the third. So basically, it is a police procedural. The difference being that obviously my main protagonist, Maya, rather than being typical usual detective or police officer, she is a senior crime officer, a SOCO, or if you like the Americanism, CSI. So it's Maya sort of investigating murders from her CSI role and starting the job, I think, very much like I did, very wet behind the ears at first, because it's a job with a huge learning curve. And yeah, then sort of finding a feet and making a succession of horrendous mistakes along the way.
I know this is going to sound like a weird first question, but considering you said started the job like you did, what was it like for your first dead body?
If you want to know the truth, so Maya's first body, obviously, if you recall, she did talk to him. I will confess that I did speak to my first dead body as well, because he wasn't in the place where I expected him to be. So it was a scene of a suicide, and for some reason I got it in my head he was going to be hanging from the loft hatch, and he wasn't. He was suspended on the stairs. So I walked past him quite disgruntled that he was getting in the way, barged past him with all the equipment and said hello and then excuse me. So yeah, that was a little bit of embarrassing. These things happen.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite complicated to go to your first scene and with all the getting all the right clothing and all the stuff and knowing what to do when you've not done it before.
Absolutely, and I think I hope it comes across in the book, Indefinitely Dead. I think the first thing is that it's very much a case of be careful what you wish for, because that feeling of trepidation when you've wanted to do a job so long and you're prepared, and like in my case, I did photography to get into the job, and I'd applied for it, and you sort of living the dream at last, but then that first sense of trepidation when you know you're going to have your first body is overwhelming, because pretty much everything builds on that moment. That's your chance to think, I do know people who have struggled with the death side of things, and if you're one of those people who think I thought I'd be all right with it but actually I'm not, then you've kissed your career goodbye before you've even started it. So it was quite stressful. But as I say, this is my 20th year now, so I think it's safe to say I've got used to them now, and I've not accidentally spoken to any others since.
How do you work that balance between writing and still working? Because it must be difficult.
Yeah, it is. I'm fortunate because I'm part-time. So, and obviously how the shifts work, and particularly in a part-time shift rota, sometimes I get time off through the week to write, which is brilliant. Other times weekends off. So, yeah, I'm fortunate. The balance is good. Just basically on days I can write, I am doing. I've really stalled since last August because I got COVID, and I've been suffering with long COVID since. So that's had a massive, I think the brain fog is massively impacted on my ability to sit and write. But I'm starting to get back into it again. And as I say, I'm now starting to really crack on with book 3. So hopefully it'll be out there before long.
Well, I'm sure with having the contract for multiple books, it must have been quite relaxing for you, knowing that you got others coming when you got that first one.
Yeah, it's a brilliant feeling, I say, when you get that book contract in the first place. Because I don't know if you know, I did write a non-fiction book a few years ago as well, the Real CSI Forensic Handbook for crime writers. And that was a dream come true. But my real wish was always wanting to write fiction. So, and I always said to myself, I'd not feel like a real writer until I got anywhere with fiction. So yeah, I'm living the dream now as well.
Yeah.
Planning a standalone as well, which again is crime related.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said about not feeling like a real writer until you got into fiction side of things. I can't believe you just said that, because that's the situation. Like, because I'm writing my own biography, but I'm also trying to work with trying to get onto a Curtis Brown crime writing course at the same time. Yeah,
right, fantastic. Yeah,
it's really kind of unusual situation, switching between fact and fiction. Why did you decide to do that?
The non-fiction book. So that sort of came about by accident, which I think is I like the thought that I sort of kind of accidentally wrote a book. When I first got into writing, I went to Swanwick Writers Summer School in Derbyshire, and there was a police talk that year by Derbyshire Police teaching the crime writers about how a murder investigation pans out, and I was in a privileged position to be able to sit there as a writer, or a wannabe starting up writer then, and coming from a police background, to see how it's very difficult to have that, to chat about a murder scene with non-police personnel. And I could see where they were sort of, because in the police you spit acronyms every few sentences and stuff, and you forget it doesn't mean the same as it does to other people. So long story short, I volunteered when I went back the following year, to do a talk on crime scene techniques for crime writers, and it was so well received. I was overwhelmed by the feedback people gave about it. Oh, it was fantastic. And then a couple of people suggested on the back of that I wrote the book. So I pitched it and had that taken on. So yeah, she's out there now.
When working on the non-fiction book, how did you decide to balance it out, and what cases did you choose to pick for the book? Because you must have had hundreds of cases to choose from.
I think, well, I've always made a thing that for me, and particularly while I'm still employed in a job, and even when I leave, that I'll never discuss cases I've worked on, because it just feels inappropriate, and I just don't think, for me, it wouldn't be right. So the cases that I've alluded to in the Real CSI were already well-known, infamous cases that were out there. I'm trying to think. No, you're asking me now, Alex, who've included in there. There were lots of well-known murder cases, and the ones I specifically picked out were ones that in the Real CSI, each chapter is dedicated to a specific discipline. So recovery of trace evidence, DNA, fingerprints, that sort of stuff. So I looked at cases where those sort of disciplines have been used to capture a murderer, really. So that was the easiest way, it sort of seemed, for me to do it, because I say it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to write about cases I'd worked on during my career. And likewise, to that extent, that also applied to writing my fiction. I'm very mindful of not writing a scenario or a scene or a case that might bear too similar resemblance to anything I've worked on in real life, because I would hate for somebody to sort of read that and think, is that to do with my loved one? Do you know what I mean? So it's quite they do say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and it's very true, massively true. It's that sort of trying to level that sensitivity with, then I think the first draft of Definitely Dead, the word count was through the roof, and it was more factual than the Real CSI, because I had a massive word dump in there, like it was very procedural, and then you look back and you think, no, this is a work of fiction. You're just gonna completely turn people off from this. So yeah, again, a little knowledge is a very dangerous thing.
When putting information in to make sure that the reader understands the crime scene, where did you strike the balance between telling the reader what they needed to know for the story and to make the story flow? because as you say, it was more difficult for you with all the experience
Yeah.
you've got, not to put everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to sort of relaying the crime scene, just sort of following instinct when what sort of the senses that spark when I walk in a crime scene. So, for example, in the first crime scene, she arrives at Carl Gorman's house when he's been found dead in the kitchen. He's in a really dishevelled, dirty, grotty house. So there's been lots and lots of houses where I've been in that, some of them hoarders' houses and what have you. They've been in such a state of disarray. So picking that sort of, I find that type of detail fascinating, because it's not every day you get to experience something like that, and that's the sort of thing I like to write about and put across to people. Likewise, I've been in some houses that have been absolutely mind-blowingly stunning, affluent, and so just getting that's the sort of thing that intrigues me when I walk into a house. So when I'm setting a crime scene, they're the sort of things I think I enjoy writing about.
Detail for me and description is always the hardest thing for me to write. What would you say is advice that you give to a writer that was looking to get better at the description?
I'd say I'm a real advocate of, I think you need to read. If you want to be a good writer, you really, really need to read, because I think inherently then you just pick up on, I think if for me, I certainly know since I've been writing, I've become a much deeper reader. I go through books now and I'm more aware of scenes, that what I like about a particular scene, and what I don't so much like. So that for me is a thing. But I think when it comes to using descriptions, I think, as I said, I think it's a case of sort of taking a look back and really put yourself in that situation and use all your senses. What's the light doing in that room? Is it dim? Is it, if you've got natural light in there, where's it coming from? Is it sunlight? Is it candlelight? That sort of thing. What does it smell like? What does it feel like? Are your feet sticking to the floor, or all that sort of stuff? How do you feel in the room? What's the temperature? Just all, for me, I just say, really just take a minute to shut your eyes and put yourself in there and imagine everything about it.
I think the problem for me is because I'm so used to hearing somebody else describe it through an audiobook, through them reading it, that I don't read it in the same way that a normal reader would. What was it like for you when you first heard the audiobook?
A bit of a shock. So we were chatting about this before. I was very pleased when obviously that they'd chosen a lady of colour to read the book, because obviously my main protagonist, Maya, is mixed race female, and it was very, very important for me personally to have a mixed race character and male main protagonist in that book. So I was pleased about that. The only thing I was a little bit disappointed about is because the book is actually supposed to be based in a fictional area of the northwest of England. So obviously you can probably tell with my Manchester twang, I was a bit devastated when I listened to it, and the narrator speaks a dialogue with a southern accent. So that was a bit of a shock. But then, it was my bad, I suppose, for not sort of pointing that out or maybe highlighting it. I don't know how, I've not listened to all of it. I've only listened to snatches, because I know certainly some of the dialogue and the way the characters talk, it's very northern. So how that translates with a southern twang, I don't know. But we live and learn, don't we, Alex?
Yeah, we do. I mean, I've always said that it does make a difference the way that the narrator always reads it. But for me, I think because I went to university and I've been able to absorb voices from all over the country, I'm okay with it. With all the people you've worked with, what would you say is the most difficult accent that you've had to pick up with that you work on?
Oh, I tell you what, and this is actually not so much some people I've worked with, but I do have family in Donegal in Southern Ireland, and my cousin has got a really, really strong accent. And it's one of the reasons I'm so glad of Facebook and social media, because we keep in touch on there. Because I think if I had to ring him to keep in touch, I would not understand him on the phone. Face to face, he's fine, but on the phone, his accent's so strong. So yeah, I think that, and a little bit the same with a really strong Scottish accent. That said, it was hilarious because many years ago, my boss, he had a very strong Southern accent. He was from the Isle of, I can never remember if it's the Isle of Man or the Isle of Wight. I think it's the Isle of Wight. And he came to, I don't know if you're familiar with the Northwest, but at the time we were working in Wigan. And a traditional Wigan accent is very, very strong. And I've sort of having to feel like I was having to translate for a couple of people in the office about the really strong Wigan dialect because he couldn't understand a word. And sort of the some of the phrases that were coming out with the real Wiganese dialect. Yeah, he didn't have a clue, bless him. So I did feel like a bit of a translator for a while.
When working on when working on the second book, what was the why did you decide to change the approach? Because you were saying it was more of a domestic angle, whereas the first one was a gang one.
Yeah. So Definitely Dead. There's obviously there's a serial killer theme running through Definitely Dead, and then there's a lot of gang activity and that sort of stuff. In the second book, it's a bit of a sort of more closer to home sort of. You know, obviously a lot of people aren't involved in serial killers or gang activity, that sort of stuff. So it was sort of really the sort of murder you'd probably be more familiar with, domestic related type thing.
Yes.
But yeah, and the basically premise of Shattered Bones, which is the second book, is a body is found discovered in a canal, and death is quickly deemed to be sort of suspicious, this body. And it's seemingly they go from thinking it's quite straightforward, we know who this person is, but then things don't work out that way. And yeah, it's quite a convoluted plot follows. But yeah, it's a different book than the first. And also one thing I found which really surprised me is in writing book 2, and also as well now, obviously we're writing the third book, is how Maya is, her voice is becoming so much stronger. She's not as nervous and hesitant as she was in book 1. She's a lot, you know, she's getting the experience of the job behind her. And I was quite surprised that she came across that way for me as I was writing the character, because that's something I recognised in myself. Obviously, as time goes by and with experience working in a job like that, it does affect, I think, your personality, and you do become a little bit more stronger and more vocal. And she's certainly more vocal in book 2, and up to now in book 3 she's even louder. She's definitely sticking up for herself, shall we say.
Yeah. At what point in your career did you become more vocal, do you think? How long did it
I'd say it probably took me a good 18 months till I really found my feet and really sort of gained my confidence. And in that early time as well, I was just dealing with the bread and butter. So I was a volume crime scene investigator. So I was just dealing with burglaries and vehicle crime and stuff. And I did shadow on a few more serious incidents, the murders and the rapes and the robberies and arsons and stuff. But yeah, I'd say a good 18 months in before I really sort of found my voice. And yeah.
Yeah, my brother did do that for a year for a private company, but then he moved into a drug company. But I was just interested as to why you decided to move from photography into forensics, because it's not what most people would assume is an automatic route into forensics.
Yeah, no, for me, the job requires a photographic or scientific background. So I was working for the police at the time, and I was in the finance branch and doing an office job. My main aim was always to go into the police, but my eyesight was too bad to get into the police force. So being a SOCO was sort of my next thing, and I didn't even know anything about the job until that stage. And when I learned about the job, I knew it was definitely for me. So I studied at photography at night school, and then got in with the photographic qualification. Hunted down my local crime scene manager and basically asked if I could shadow jobs and stuff. And yeah, just hounded them till a job came up, and I think they gave me the job, so I'd stop mindering them.
Since you've been working on a job, what's the strangest place you've ever gone and done a crime scene?
Oh, good grief, that's a very good question. You're stretching. Oh, Alex, you're really stretching my mind now. I think there's just so many in so much as you go to a lot of places where things can seem very surreal and very out of place. So you can go walk into a house that seems like a nice little old person's house, and it's like carnage and a bloodbath in the kitchen and outside, and that's quite bizarre. And I think as well we've been to sort of farms where the outhouses have been taken over and been set up as cannabis farms, and that's absolutely overwhelming to see that when that's all fully set up. I think really more sort of strange situation, if you will, rather than actual strange scenes is because I know some of my colleagues have had weird and wonderful jobs that have been at brothels and places like that. I think for me, not so much strange scene, but strange sensation is, and this might sound really, really odd, but sometimes I can be working in a house with a body, and then I'll go outside to get something out of the van, and I'll walk back in, and I'm so preoccupied thinking, right, I need to do this, I need to do that, I've got this kit, I need to make notes as I go along, and what am I going to do at this? You walk back in the room, and then you'll go, oh my God, I forgot you were in there, and it is quite a shock. You will forget that body is in that room because so that's happened quite a few times, and that gets a bit unnerving, especially if you're on your own. It can get a bit creepy. That's why I talk to myself and sing a lot.
So how many cases have you worked on your own?
Fortunately, not that many. If it is deemed suspicious or a murder, then there's usually a couple of us in there. I've had the odd one where it's been sort of a sudden death, which we're quite happy we're not, and it's just how it's panned out. I'll either be there with a crime scene manager or an officer, and the officer might have gone out to take a phone call or something, or likewise with the crime scene manager, and then you go in your own, and it's a bit. No, those are the early days as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I'd even think about doing things. I mean, because I've been in courtrooms watching and thinking, yeah, just hearing about it from the lawyer's angle, I can't imagine trying to get the evidence and making sure it's all sorted and being on your own as well at the same time. Yeah.
Court for me, you mentioned court, that is absolutely terrifying. That is, I've only been called a couple of times. I've only had to give evidence once. The other times I've been called, my evidence has been accepted on the 11th hour, but the thought of standing up in that courtroom and having to give evidence, that terrifies me. It really, really does. It just such a daunting sort of experience, and I think you're mindful of the fact that people are gonna, you've got barristers who are trained to sort of run rings around you, if you like, and that would be, I chuck a dead body around all day, I'm happy with that, but ask me to go in court, and that would be the squeaky bum time, to coin a phrase we use at work.
As I've seen lawyers trying to prepare for something. When you say that the evidence has been agreed, how many times would you have to say you had to wait and see whether that's been the case?
It's not too bad for us. They usually do try and sort of agree it. A lot of times when I have been asked to give evidence or been given court warnings, it's been basically to do with scenes that we photograph, because obviously photography is everything that we do in our work, and that even goes to photographing victims of assault and that sort of stuff. So usually now, if it comes to photographic evidence, that what they'll do is we'll try and get the evidence agreed, just for the simple part that obviously as a SOCO we're a finite resource. So if they want to pull me off from my shift one day to go and potentially sit in a courtroom for a day or maybe a week, depending on how long the case is scheduled for.
Yeah.
That's really not, you're taking a sock off the street then for a week, and
Yeah.
that's not ideal considering how, when it's feast or famine the job, but when we're busy, we're ridiculously busy. But yeah, I think the way as well we sort of write our statements leaves no room really for us to be called and questioned for our evidence, because as well as the rule is, if you keep your note taking and everything, all your admin and your written work is maintained and bang up to date, your witness statement's just basically the précis of that, if you like. So you don't leave any ambiguity or room for questioning. That's the plan anyway, and it stood me in good stead for 20 years. So sticking with that.
How important would you say that photos are to facial reconstruction? Because that's, of course, important to the second book.
Yeah. So very important for facial reconstruction, not just photographs as well, but any CCTV footage as well that can be used. And it just generally we use photographs not just for facial reconstruction but for others. There's been many times we've had suspects brought into the custody suite at the police station, and we'll be asked to go down there and take still photographs of them sort of facing different angles, so those photographs can later on be compared to CCTV footage, particularly if you've got distinct clothing on or hats or footwear, that sort of stuff. So the photography is massive in everything we do. But yeah, facial reconstruction, that fascinates me. The facial reconstruction, which I describe in book 2 in Shattered Bones. I actually did a FutureLearn course on that a couple of years ago, and it's a fascinating subject. I don't know, you're aware of FutureLearn? It's a little bit like the Open University. It's similar to that, but they do a lot of really good free courses online. And I did an archaeology and anthropology one on there, because again, that absolutely fascinates me. I have had one job many years ago with skeletal remains, and worked with an archaeologist and anthropologist on that, and it's fascinating. So yeah, if anyone's interested in learning, get on FutureLearn and have a look, but definitely look at the facial reconstruction one, because how they turn skeletal remains, or something with no flesh on, and then get a pretty much perfect impression of that person facially. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, because for me, I've been aware of it for a long time, because I first watched it in Prime Suspect 2 a long time, because that would have been the early 90s before I was even aware of it. And then I started watching it after it come out on DVD. You must have been doing that for ages. But
yeah,
that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, and moving on from that as well, a different discipline again is EFITs, which again is something a lot of police forces use. And the Greater Manchester, we have a specialist imaging unit, and they're responsible for putting the EFITs together. And again, there you see some of them, and the way the people who are trained in producing the EFITs and how they've worked with victims and witnesses, and yeah, the results they pulled together at the end are absolutely fantastic. I know there's also some very, very funny ones out there as well. There's some that, I don't know if it's so much to do with the person who's produced the image, or maybe the actual facial layout, if you like, of your suspect. But there are some pearlers out there if you look.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a background in witness support, so I know how nervous it is for witnesses to give evidence and that. And I'm just imagining what it could be like when they're asking them to do an EFIT.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I don't envy anybody having to do it. That's a lot of responsibility, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I just wouldn't even know where to start.
Exactly, absolutely.
Have you ever had to do that in like training?
No, I nearly did. I've been to attend a burglary where an old lady had become the victim of a bogus burglary. He'd basically gone in, said that she had slates missing from a roof, and he conned his way into the house and up to a bathroom, and he tipped some maggots in a bath and told her that, they're all coming out of your bathroom ceiling, and took a load of money off her, and obviously never came back. Not to do the work anyway. He did come back on 2 different occasions to con some more money out of her. So I've been asked to go and fingerprint the house, and they did have officers watching the house, waiting to see if they could catch this guy come back. I think it was the 3rd or 4th time. But the officers who'd been keeping an eye out, the shift had finished, they were going back on handover. Sod's law, in the meantime, as they've left and I've arrived, this guy's returned back to the house. So I was a witness to that, obviously shouted up the police, and we got him arrested later on because I managed to get the registration number of the car he was in. But yeah, it nearly did come down to an e-fit. But unfortunately, we did not an e-fit. Sorry, it's called a Viper. So basically, you walk in and you're given images like a typical ID parade, but it's all done on the television. Anyway, it turns out I couldn't do it because by the time I passed, since I'd seen the guy, to then him getting ready for Viper, which is something I believe you do quite a lot. He's grown his hair and facial hair as well, because he was bald when he was obviously closely shaved his head when I saw him running off. In the meantime, while he was on remand, he'd grown his hair and his beard, and I just couldn't say 100% whether it was the same guy. Wow. It's just very, very frustrating, you know, and you sort, because obviously you've got to be 100% sure, and when it comes to crunch, it's like, can't be 100% sure. So that was quite frustrating.
Some of the colleagues that you drew on Indefinitely Dead, I mean, I know that a lot of writers say they don't base it on people, but there's some right awkward people in the book, and I'm thinking, oh God, I'm glad. I hope you didn't base it on some of the people, you know.
No, I can honestly say it's not based. None of them are based on anybody I know. What I would say more than anything is it's a combination of personality traits of people I've come across in life, in various walks of life. And again, some of them have been because of, obviously we deal a lot with the members of the public and this, that and the other. My boss at the time would never have dreamed of walking in her office and getting our attention by double clapping her hands. If she did that, she would feel the wrath of the staff. But yeah, I did know somebody who has done that. So yeah, it's more the personality traits. It's not based on anybody I work with. I can honestly say that.
We seem to have quite a few comments alongside it. I don't know whether there's any questions.
Oh.
In the audience, I don't know if you can see them.
Yeah, I can. Oh, hi, Sam. Sam's on.
Yeah. Can you see any questions on there? Because
I'm just having a quick through. Somebody's asking about Swanwick, because I mentioned that before. That's Andrew in Nottingham. Yeah, Swanwick was back last year. Last year was the first year. We were back since COVID, and bookings are open again for this year. So I am going to go again this week. Somebody's asked, are my book available in libraries? Oh, one of the best author moments I've actually had was going in my local library. I was running an event and I'd actually gone in to leave some flyers out and walked in the local library, and a copy of the real CSI was on the stand in my local library, and that was a massive thrill. So I know the real CSI is in some libraries. I don't know about the others. You'd have to ask your library and request it. Andrew's also asked about a TV company with a view of getting your book adapted. Can't actually answer that one at the moment. That's for hopefully something I can share with you later in the year.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, somebody's asking about, you had mentioned Prime Suspect. That is Linda LaPlante's novel with Jane Tennyson. They're fantastic books. And Sam's asked how his book 3 going. So as I said before, I mentioned obviously been suffering with long COVID. I'm just getting back into the writing habit. So even though I've not physically been sat writing it, obviously the stories and the characters are continuously growing all the time in my head. So I do know what's going to happen, which is always a relief, because when I wrote book 1, I didn't know what was going to happen. I only knew the ending and didn't know the beginning or the middle bit until I sat down and wrote it. And I don't know if other people sort of feel the same when they write. I feel like that my little characters, who are my invisible friends, sort of let me know what's happening as I go along. So but in book 2 I knew what was going to happen. Book 3 I've got an idea where it's going, not completely, but you're getting there. But say book 1, other than the ending, I really didn't know how it was going to pan out at first.
How did you get over your first brick wall? Because I haven't managed that yet.
How did what? Sorry.
How did you get over your first brick wall of writing when you got like?
Just keep plugging away at it. Or maybe when it's been really difficult, just write a completely different scene. For me as well, that's also helped. As I've mentioned, I'm sort of plugging away at a standalone as well, which has been sat on my computer now for a couple of years. If ever I'm struggling writing, I'd have a chip away at that because it's a completely different storyline and different characters and different voices. I think you just have to keep persisting. I think you have to just try and keep making it a habit and just getting on with it. Reading helps as well, I think.
Yeah, I must admit, I think reading other people's work for me is a nice way of breaking it. Who have you been reading as a break from your writing?
Oh, I was just thinking who I've read recently. You can probably tell from the bookcase behind me, I love reading. Unfortunately, I'm not a Kindle person. I like real copies, but my go-to authors are Linda LaPlante, Peter James, Helen Fields. I love Robert Brinzer. I'm currently reading American Dirt at the minute by, I think it's Jeannie Cummins. I'm not sure of the name, but that was, I think, one of the big books from last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, we usually got a few spares on the go as well. I'm one of those people, if I go somewhere, I do have to take a book, otherwise I panic. It's a bit like a comfort blanket, but then it's also the stress of if I go somewhere and I have time to read but don't, then that's just wasted. Right. I'll flip that on you. How about you? Who are you reading at the moment?
I'm just started reading the new Matt Wesolowski one. It's because I interviewed him last Halloween for the book club, and I've just had time to read his new one, and it's very different to the normal kind of stuff. What do you think to podcasts yourself? Because Wesolowski's approach is to write about podcasts, and I know that podcasts are quite popular in true crime angles.
Yeah, they are. I've been fortunate enough. I've been able to take part in a few, which has always been good fun. But yeah, like I said, they're not something I really listen to. I think probably really because I live quite close to work, so I think if I travelled any length of time, I'd probably listen to them more in the car. But I don't get a chance. Yeah. But yeah, like you say, I've become aware of, because to get over COVID, I've been walking a lot, so I've tried to listen to a few on my phone. But where I walk, I lose a signal quite a lot, so I'm stuck without podcasts. But I have become aware there's loads of true crime podcasts out there. Absolutely loads. So I think maybe that's something. If I give up the day job, I can spend more time writing and set up my own podcast. That'd be cool.
Yeah, because there are lots of different angles, and I've not heard a forensic one. There must be one out there somewhere, but I've not heard.
Yeah, I know Linda LaPlante does one, and she runs it with a lady who's a crime scene investigator. I'm assuming she's probably from the Met, and that's one again. I need to sit down at some point and listen to them, because I'm sure they will be good. Because I mean, Linda LaPlante's absolutely fantastic anyway.
I mean, I think they are actually free available on Audible, if you remember. So because I've got them in my library, so
yeah.
If anyone wants to look that up, they are there. I think the Linda LaPlante ones. Yeah. When you started working on advising people and working with people like Graham Bartlett and courses and stuff, what's it like working on courses with people and constructing how to write a novel?
It's great fun. I absolutely love it, and I know Graham feels the same as I do about doing it. It's a real passion for me. It's just a fantastic opportunity to combine the two things I love, which is obviously my job and writing, talking about writing, helping other crime writers as well get the facts right. I absolutely love running those courses, and we're very fortunate over the years. Graham and I, we've done quite a few. We did one at Harrogate, Theakston's Crime, a few years ago, and that was fantastic. We've worked with The Guardian a few times, and yeah, we've been all over together and separately, but I absolutely love doing it. It's great fun. I've met some lifelong friends as well through running these courses. It's amazed me in the relatively short time that I have been involved with the writing community, what and how the majority of people are massively friendly and supportive, and you know, everyone's pleased for everybody else's success and supports each other and encourages each other. So yeah, you know, it's, I think Graham once said something like, you know, this doesn't even feel like work. It's not. It's good fun. There's a lot of prep goes into the courses, particularly when we've done ones where we've set up a little crime scene, which was good fun actually. I need to tell you about this. We set up a crime scene. I think we did it at Theakston's Crime first, and then we took it to Swanwick. And our mock-up crime scene involved a plastic knife, which we blood-stained with red ink, some fake cash. I produced what looked like blocks of heroin and cocaine, and wrapped in cling film, so they look like kilos of drugs, and bits of white powder in proper drugs bags and tin foil and all of that sort of stuff. And I can't remember, I think we were running our own crime course, if I recall correctly, in Brighton, and Graham was driving, so he took the drugs, if you like. He drove from Derbyshire back home to Brighton with these alleged drugs in the boot of his car. And yeah, it was, I remember thinking as I was transporting them up to Swanwick from Manchester to Derbyshire, thinking, dear God, please don't let me get stopped, because it did look very, very convincing.
Yeah, because we really used to have to dry him out, and he got some like weird things that people used to do in like labs and stuff. What's the strangest thing you've heard people do with evidence that they shouldn't do?
Oh yeah, a lot of stuff gets flushed. Yeah, there's an awful lot of stuff goes down toilets and things like that. So the youve end needs taking off, or bits of drains and stuff. Stuff gets buried. It gets wrapped up in stuff and hidden in lofts, and I'm massively claustrophobic, so if you tell me there's something in a loft, then that's really going to ruin my day. I really don't do enclosed spaces. So yeah, just some of the weird and wonderful ways that they have of getting rid of stuff, but unfortunately it's very difficult, I think, to get away with things these days because of all the, certainly blood, because of all the, obviously, the techniques we've got and stuff like that. You know, people can wash away blood, but the analogy I love to use is, if you think of a time when you've knocked a brew or a drink over, and that's typically something like 250 millilitres of fluid, and that goes absolutely everywhere, all over your coffee table, up the wall, all over your carpet, what have you. And if you've stabbed somebody and they're bleeding pints and pints of blood, that's not going to clean up easily, and it really doesn't. And as much as you think they've got away with it, obviously we use stuff like luminol, which when we rip your carpets up and use luminol on your underlay or your floorboards, it's always going to show up. I know there was a thing, quite a few people in the past have tried things. I can't remember which notorious serial killer it was who tried to get rid of bodies with the acid baths and stuff.
Martin Clunes played him on ITV.
Was it Nielsen?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So, but again, you know, things like that, well, it will work. Yeah, you're always going to have problems with your drains. Pesky neighbours, and there's always that dog walker as well.
Dog walking is quite a cliche. What's the biggest cliche that you've had to advise people not to use in their own crime fiction on the courses?
Oh, that's actually timed quite well. I've just noticed Sam's just put what drives you mad on TV or in books, so that's good timing. That, you know, it's seamless here, isn't it? These events. I think the one thing, the biggest cliche, is the misuse of fingerprints. So you can't get fingerprints on all surfaces. You can only get them on smooth, non-porous surfaces. and quite large surface areas. So things like door handles and light switches doesn't retain fingerprints because it's too small a surface area that's been touched several times. So that's something that that drives me nuts. I think the biggest thing that really gets me screaming at the television is when you've got your crime scene and they'll show the crime scene investigators going on with the scene suits and stuff, but then the detective just breezes in, maybe might snap on a pair of gloves as an afterthought, but then starts touching everything and moving everything and then recovers evidence and takes it with him. There's just no way that would happen. There's absolutely, you know, even if the chief con rolled up at my crime scene and tried to do that, it just wouldn't happen. So yeah, I think that's one. Oh, Sam, you've asked a question. You've got me started on a subject now that'll have me ranting for hours. We'll still be sat here at midnight and I'll be venting. But yeah, I think they're the sort of the main things. And yeah, and just yeah, definitely fingerprints and lack of scene preservation and detectives recovering things. We're the crime scene investigators. It's our job to womble things away from crime scenes and the way it's recovered and packaged and everything as well. So yeah, it wouldn't happen.
Yeah. Well, crime scene managers aren't often shown in fiction because, as you say, the detectives kind of take on the role.
Take the lead.
Yeah, and they don't in real life. They don't really have much to do with the crime scene. Much to do until afterwards, until after you've already collected the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, what happens? So when we've got our murder scene, the crime scene manager and the senior investigating officer, the DI or DCI, whoever, they will work together closely all the way through, and they will agree a forensic strategy. So typically what happens is the crime scene manager will write it up and they'll say, this is what I want, these are your priorities, these are the first things I want you to recover. And both the crime scene manager and the senior investigating officer will have to sign that paperwork off. And if there's any deviation, from that strategy for any, it can happen, particularly with a live murder investigation. If we've got suspects in or witnesses in, it might suddenly be a case of, right, I know I told you to concentrate on taking trace evidence from the body, but now we've had intelligence that there's offender's mobile phone in the back bedroom or the knife's been left in, you know, so go and get that for me, and somebody's on the way, and, you know, so it can change all the time. So we do deviate quite often from strategies and stuff. But yeah, the senior investigating officer, sometimes they will attend the scene and they will, as it's first been discovered, once we've sort of put all the stepping plates down and everything. But yeah, they'll always do a final walkthrough with us as well. But with regards to the crime scene manager, one of the last thing that will happen is, before we close a crime scene down, another crime scene manager who's had absolutely no involvement in the job will do a final walkthrough with us, and it's just a fresh pair of eyes just to make sure we haven't missed anything, because, you know, it's human nature. You can overlook things, especially if you're working in a house that's massively cluttered, and depending on the number of suspects you have, if you've still got suspects outstanding, you might think you've covered everything, but it's always good to have that fresh pair of eyes walk through and just make sure, because it's better that than suddenly having that cold sweat at 3 o'clock in the morning when you wake up and suddenly think, oh, there was such a thing in the kitchen and we never did anything with it and now it's too late.
That must be really complicated. It must be more complicated though when you're dealing with cold cases. How many cold cases have you had to deal with?
Yeah, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I think it's an absolutely fantastic thing to work on. I've not had much involvement on any of the cold cases other than certain historic jobs where maybe I've been asked to go and rephotograph a building or a particular location because maybe a new witness has come forward and they want to sort of their recollection of the area. We want to take those photographs to show how well they compare to their recollection of the area. So I've had a couple of jobs like that, but you know, this is one thing I say quite regularly. Absolute kudos to those people involved at the time in the investigation that's now come back as been a cold case investigation, because they've had foresight to think, even though DNA technology wasn't a thing back in the day of, say, a murder happening, they've still retained pieces of evidence, which now obviously we can do DNA on. And I think that foresight and that idea, huge respect to them. But yeah, that is something I'd love to get involved in. But then I'd also like to work on a serial killer case before I finish the job. But that's not happened yet either.
Because people would think that serial killer cases are quite common if you take the way that crime fiction deals with it, but they're not that common, are they?
Not at all. Not at all. I can't remember the statistics. I did look it up once because that's how sad I am, how many serial killer cases there have been. And there's really, really not. And I think that's why we write about them, and that's why we like to read about them, aren't we? Because we're fascinated with them, and we're fascinated behind the psychology of what makes people tick and how they do what they do. But yeah, no, there's not that many serial killer cases at all. I sound disappointed, don't I? Which I probably shouldn't.
It's through working with fiction that you just it changes the way you look at things, doesn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
When I was studying this as a student, the year that Shipman was investigated, his case alone changed the entire statistical blip because he killed that many people.
Absolutely, yeah.
He changed the statistics for that 1 year altogether. I mean, it's just unbelievable how he managed to get away with it for so long.
Absolutely. And I mean, the Shipman legacy from what he's left is as a result of that. Things have changed so much now that if somebody passes away, and there's now rules that has to be looked into if that person's not been seen by a doctor or another medical profession, how many hours or days before they passed away. And but it's like you say, it's frightening that he got away with it so long, but seemingly he was a very, very arrogant man, isn't it? And I have to say, in my career, one thing I will notice about suspects, particularly repeat offenders, obviously not comparing to like serial killers, but they do get away with it because of the sheer arrogance. I mean, you're even talking about, say, sneaking burglars who walk around housing estates in the middle of summer knowing people are going to leave windows and doors open, and will think nothing of seeing a family at the end of the garden having a barbecue, and then they'll just sneak in the back door, steal what they can and make off. It is that arrogance. I don't know, a lot of them get very unlucky for us and the victims, but yeah, it's the arrogance I think just makes them sort of successful, if you like. They just don't care.
It's definitely awkward. I mean, I couldn't imagine, because I've had dealing with victims and the impact of it, and people just don't realise that how easy it can be for repeat offenders if they're not careful enough.
Absolutely. And like you say, I mean, that is one thing that day to day really, really does still upset me even after all these years. You see some people who've been burgled, and some people are very matter of fact, blasé about it. I've seen other people who it's really destroyed their lives. They've been absolutely devastated, and they've got to the stage where they're too scared to stay in their own house, but then they don't want to leave the house in case something happens while they're away. And that feeling, that violation and that sense of fear, it is awful. What I would love those people to see, I would love them to come into the custody suite and see what the burglar actually looks like when we drag them in, because usually they're sort of 3 stone wet through. They're either very young or they've got a drug habit, so they're very stick thin. And I think a lot of people, when they're in fear like that, I think they picture somebody who's sort of 6'5", built like this, who probably armed with all sorts, and in reality that isn't the case. But that damage is done, that psychological damage is done, and I hate seeing people who are left like that. It is heartbreaking.
So as we're getting near the end of the interview now, is there anything that you want to tell us about what's coming up for you?
Oh, so I would say, obviously I mentioned Shattered Bones, which is my book 2, which was also out last year. I'm working away on book 3, which is going well, and hopefully if I can get it finished, that will be out at the end of this year as well. I think the only other thing I'd like to chat about is probably the standalone, which I'm writing, which is very, very different to the Maya trilogy. One of the characters in it is going to be a CSI, but I don't want to just write all CSI books. She's just going to be one of the lead characters with the investigator.
Yeah.
And the premise of the standalone at the moment is basically a female wakes up to realise that she's dead. And what's worse than waking up to realise you're dead, it's waking up to realise you've been murdered. And she's sentient. She realizes she can physically see her own dead body lying in the hallway, and she then realizes it's one of her neighbors who has killed her. And she it's a case of, will she realize which neighbor has killed her? Will she figure it out before the police do, sort of thing? So yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment. So, and it's been good fun to write. Completely different, as I say, from the Maya books, and a little bit off kilter, but yeah, a good book. It's been fun so far.
Sounds very different. I mean, when you're coming up with a standalone, that must have been an unusual idea to come up with. I mean, how did you come up with that? I mean,
I'm just weird. I don't know. I think it's probably just a flippant conversation once we had in the office, and it was sort of like, if we should really leave like an answer phone message in here for when we're out. So if you've been burgled, press 1. If you've had your house set fire to, press 2. If you're dead, press 3. And it sort of came from that flippant conversation of like I say, that awareness that, oh my God, I'm dead is bad enough, and then I've been murdered, oh my God, that's even worse. So just because I'm a bit odd, I think. And I do find myself often thinking about what does happen when we die, that I don't believe. I mean, I'm a Christian anyway, so I've got my faith side of that perspective, but I just think sort of for the body and the soul, that sort of, will we still hang around and or completely disappear? So it's sort of been built from that little bit, thinking what will happen. And for me, the character in this standalone, she's sort of caught in this limbo, so she can't move on until she knows who's done it.
Yeah, very surreal. It reminds me a little bit of a certain film from the 90s. I won't say which one because everyone's what I mean, but of course that is going to give away something, so I won't.
You know what? Yeah, absolutely. I love that film, and I never ever thought of that. Yeah, subconsciously, that's where it's from. I'm going to have to write a pottery scene now, Alex. Thanks for that.
Yeah, that is so funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
On that comedy note, we shall probably leave it there, and I shall see you guys next week with Eamon along here and Stevie.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Alex.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm just going to turn it off now.